Good evening, everybody. It's Saturday, March 20th. And if it's Saturday evening, it's definitely Divided We Stand. I don't really know how to begin with this tonight. I should feel happy because, we've been talking about this before that, Donald Trump's gone. At the very least, we've got him out of there and we're in control. But the malaise continues week by week. We have this foreboding feeling that we're never going to get out of this. And as David has said, we probably may not ever get out of this, at least not in our lifetime. Tonight we're going to bring up some points that revolve around that idea of malaise. And we're going to ask that you share in this important discussion. And perhaps David and I will learn from you about what's really happening out there. But I think tonight I'd like to start off tonight talking about the filibuster, whether it should happen or not. And we're going to go through that and a few other things. So please hold tight. Please share this. If you're on a computer and you're on YouTube, please share it to your Facebook page. If you're on Facebook, please share it to another Facebook page. And by all means, if you're new to this channel, please subscribe on YouTube and become a member of our Facebook group called Divided We Stand. We would really appreciate it. We work very hard at this. It involves no money whatsoever. We lose money. We're doing this because it's the right thing. We're two old men who are on a mission to do something good. And speaking of one of those two old men, it's my good friend, David Price. Dave, it's great to see you.
Hey, great to see you. I was listening to your introduction. Did you say something about we're going to talk about mayonnaise tonight? Did I understand you correctly? Is
Close
that what you
enough.
said?
Close enough.
What was it? Mayonnaise? I don't know. I mean,
Malaise.
oh,
Malaise.
so we're going to talk about people that come from Malaysia?
Um, they could be.
Actually, Brian, that's a very bad joke I just made on two levels. Number one, it's just a stupid joke. But secondly, what I want to talk about later, I agree the filibuster is there, but I want to talk about this Asian mess and how it relates to the history of the United States and how it relates to the former president and how it relates to a number of things. So, we will end up talking about not Malaysians per se, but we will be talking about all those of Asian American, and I stress American there, ancestry, or at least those who have now been accepted as citizens or in the process of getting such. So, what's your thoughts on the filibuster there, brother? Let me just say this before I begin.
Mhm.
I'm not a fan of the filibuster, but I really do like the belly buster. That's that big hamburger
Okay.
that they have at the place outside Salem, Hoodox. Have you ever had the belly buster?
No, but my belly's busted.
No, well, that's true. I got busted for drugs, but no, the belly buster's big, and it's a good thing. The filibuster's big, but not such a good thing. But why don't you tell us what you think about it?
All right. I'm going to come from this angle. It's not so much whether the filibuster is right or wrong. It's really my reaction to Republicans, Dave. I've seen a lot this week. I saw Rand Paul in this just obnoxious attack on Dr. Fauci. Screwing up.
You've got a lag in both now.
Really?
But I didn't have it before in Vision, but now I do have it in Vision. So
God damn it.
bring us up a minute.
All right, let me turn the music off.
Yeah.
All right, let me see what I can do. I'm gonna just put up a new scene and see what I can do. I mean, it's just warning me that we're having issues. Let me.
Yeah, but the are the issues?
I can't even see you in the guest. I mean, I'm trying. Let me see if I can add less.
I'm on live. I mean, it looks like on me. I mean, I don't see you.
Well, I don't see.
Because I'm not. I'm out of. Host can see and hear you. And now I see you.
Okay, hold on. I don't know why I can't see you here. It's just you're not. I can see me here. Okay, I don't even know if people are even seeing us now. To be honest with you, we gotta just hold on.
Well, here's the thing, Brian. I'm wondering. I didn't tell you. I can be invisible now, so you'll just hear my voice.
Right. I mean, this shit is just pissing me off. Oh no, we're not even on now. So what? I haven't gone on yet. But hold it. I did add you, right? Yeah.
I don't know. Did you? It says.
Let me
here's,
go. No, we're not even live now. We're not. Oh, hold it. There's another one on here. That's the reason. Oh, I can't quit this one. Let me see. I'm gonna quit the old. I'm gonna force quit the old one. It came back the old one.
Yeah. Well, that's because it's possessed.
Okay. Now, good. Okay, I just got it. Now we're good. Now I think we're gonna be good.
I want to see myself though. I'm.
Yeah, pretty. I know. We're gonna get there. Hold it.
Nothing fancy tonight.
No, nothing fancy. But I gotta get your face in there though.
Well, not if I'm in witness protection.
Okay.
There we are.
You know, they have this thing where you can, do your shit like behind the scenes, but I can't even like think about that right now.
Don't worry about it. Just if
Okay.
you were planning on any videos, don't use them because tonight we'll
No,
just
I'm
do
not.
talkie.
All right,
Because
that's
it's
good.
yeah, it's good. Looks good.
Let me see. I just have you alone here just to break it up. Right.
Me. Yep.
Okay, that's good.
That's good. Yep. 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 Yep.
And
Yep. Yep.
one
Yep. Yep.
more, and that's me, and that's good. All right, then we're going on.
Yeah. It's still shit ass on my end on the video, but that's
Yeah, but we're
okay.
not we're not live. It can't. Hold on, we are on. What the fuck? We are on. It says we're on. Now the question is, it
Well, would
looks
you
like
please
there's. I don't see any kind of lag, so we should be on right now.
ask somebody if you can see us and you can hear us, please let us
It's
know.
8:33. That's Trev saying it's intermutted up.
Who said that?
Resolution is keeping up. Lag is gone. Well, somebody said lag was gone at 8:32.
Okay. Well, that's good.
But then internutted up. um, I don't know why this, because I keep seeing the old green screen there. Let me just go like this for a second. That should be. We got some old shit going here. We see and hear you. All right, Mandy. That's Mandy Sadowski.
Potamkin, the actor.
Yes, he wants your autograph.
I can
Okay.
understand
All
that.
right. Look, we're going to assume that we're on. We got people on YouTube. We got people, I believe, on Facebook now. Honestly, Dave and I didn't know that we were on because we had two programs open because we were trying to sell this. They had an update, and we've never had a problem doing that, folks. But we did today, so I think we're on. So I think we're going back to the filibuster. Can we bring
Let's
back
do go back.
sort of to where you were about
All right. So
what you felt?
okay. So you want me to
Thanks,
start there
Trev.
again?
Anyway, anybody else want to come on tonight? We'll throw you a line, okay? And I mean that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anytime,
Just
right?
say here, and I'll send you a line.
Well, really, we're just talking about the history of the filibuster. So let's just pick it up kind of where it is now. The problem is that the American people want action. And the filibuster makes the Senate completely inactive, right? You're not going to get anything. Republicans don't have control,
Right.
and all they can do is just say no, just say no, just say no. Uh, Look at the votes. Again, I referenced Mr. McConnell, so I'm not making this up, who said, we're going to vote against anything Democratic, even if it's good for the country. So you have to work around it. Now, somebody might say, well, yeah, well, then how did the rescue package get passed? And that, of course, as we know, was because it was a money package. You get to do that once a year. However, since it wasn't used last year, it apparently is cumulative, so you get two shots at it. But you already saw, Brian, that the $15, which was the raise in the minimum wage, was taken out because the
It
Senate
wasn't
historian
according to
said
parliamentary this or that,
no, right. So, but what I'm saying is the best thing I think is just to eliminate the filibuster. Now, President Biden was opposed to it going in. He looked at it, thinking it could still be used, and he already has said that no, he wants to at least go back to the talking filibuster. And again, referring to Mr. Smith goes to what? It's just the idea of you stand up there. Now, as I understand it, and if somebody out there knows more, I've done a little bit of research on it. I'm not that well versed in it. That you can make adjustments to the filibuster with a simple majority, right? So one of the suggestions that I thought was good if it could be done is you could filibuster if people don't want to take it out, but you can call for an end to that filibuster at any time by majority, right? So what would happen then? It would mean that the Republicans would have to keep everybody on the floor. Everybody would have to be there because at any point, which is exactly what happened when your friend there did the 9-hour delay tactic.
Oh,
when when
Johnson,
he when
Ron
Johnson
Johnson.
when Johnson when he left the floor, there were no Republicans. The Democrats there said, "Okay, we're going to cut back hours of debate." Is exactly what happened. Um, and people far brighter than I see this is the way it will play out. Right now, you have Senator Manchin from West Virginia. Now, Here's the thing: West Virginia is a red state. Okay, it used to be a solid Democratic state, coal miners unions. It's now a solid red state. So you have to ask yourself, political pragmatism: is it better to have somebody with a D on his name who isn't always a D? Because if you don't have him, you're going to have an R, and that seems to be the thinking. And then they have one of your favorite women, the Arizona senator that you love so much, who I don't know what her reasons are, right?
Cinema.
Cinema, yeah. And she doesn't want to do that. So right now, there appears to be pretty much 48 solid votes to do whatever is necessary. The president is now at least saying he'll move to the talking filibuster. And my guess would be, and this is what, like I say, people smarter than I are saying, is if you get to that point, you're going to find out that it still isn't enough, but it will show, with certainty that you need to get rid of the filibuster. Right. The concern is well, next time, if you get the majority, put the filibuster back in. I mean, that's where we are in America right now. This idea of unity, not going to happen. This idea of working across the aisle, not going to happen. And so if you want to get things done in either party on this type of Senate, you've got to have the simple majority vote, which also gets to the idea of America. Now, why is it so desperate right now? Is the fact that Republicans, and I don't know the number, it seems incredible, this number, but I ran across it somewhere, 473 bills pending or enacted or under talking stages in 43 of the 50 states to in some way limit the vote. Okay? Can't have that. Can't have that. If you're a citizen, you vote. It's that simple. I mean, a 16-year-old can't vote, okay, but 18-year-olds can. Doesn't say you can only vote if you're black, if you're this, if you're that, if you're not. And, people say, well, it's not that. Well, it is bad, okay? You make it easier to vote. You don't make it more difficult to vote. So I think there's going to be tremendous pressure on the Democrats from outside to get rid of the filibuster. I think they can use or should use the idea of, well, the Republicans voted against the bill that 75%, or the bill that became law, 75% wanted. So I would hope and I believe that the filibuster's days are numbered, but it's not going to be tomorrow. I think they'll try some things and they'll find out that none of them work.
Now you do, and this is a leading question, but you do agree with me that the Republicans would do that. They would get rid of the bill if it helped them.
Brian, there's nothing. Look, it's very simple. Okay. And you and I, we've talked about this. We've talked about it on the show. This is just my feeling. Remember, nothing I say is, any smarter or any better than anybody else. But I think at this point, the Republicans have an advantage. I really do. Okay. And here's why I say that. They are a party representing white people. Who else do they represent, Brian? Nobody. Right? Now, there are some black people and some Asian people and
who are wealthy that they might
Cubans and the poor recent arrivals from Latin America that they convince the Democrats are just like the socialists from your country. But basically, it's white people, right?
Right.
And whereas the Democrats are more spread out and have to represent all types of people. So basically, nobody opposes the Republicans when they decide to do something. The white people, I mean, look. And Trump co-opted, if you want to say, or grabbed power or took power or was handed power or whatever. So you've got a de facto president who we know where he stands on everything pretty much in his 4 years. And so the Republicans would do whatever they can with no moral compunction because there's no moral barometer. Right. Once in a while, a Mitt Romney will speak up. I love the fact that, oh, yeah, this is wrong, but you know what? I'm not going to stay and fight it. I'm going to leave and go somewhere else. Right? That's what they do. Leave. I'm going to go somewhere. I don't want to be here and fight. You've got 5 senators already, Republican senators. Granted, there is no such thing necessarily right now as a good American 100% of the time in the Republican Party in the Senate. But these are some of the ones from the past who haven't been as bad as some of the others. 5 of those are not going to run. They say maybe as many as 7 or 8. It doesn't take a crystal ball to see that unless things change dramatically, and it won't in 2 years enough, there'll be Trump Republicans taking over, and the Senate is only going to get worse if you don't make changes. As I say, the other thing that is just a pet peeve of mine, and maybe nobody else, maybe it doesn't bother anyone else, but it does bother me. We rightfully need to get rid of the reminders of ongoing racism in America. I have no problem with that. But we're very quick to change road names. Okay. I no longer live, haven't moved anywhere. I no longer live on Jefferson Davis Highway. I live on Richmond Highway. 3 schools here in this area are changing their names because they were named after either Confederates or racists from the early 20th century. All that's good. But institutions like the Electoral College and the filibuster, which have either been designed specifically to continue systemic white racism, or have been used for that fact, we continue. And so sometimes, I'm saying, let's stop with the name changing for a while, focus on the big things, get rid of that, and then move back to the name changing. So for me, it's simple. Filibuster must go. I'm certainly entertaining any arguments on the other side. I'll certainly listen to them, but I don't see a value to it in 21st century America. If, in fact, I view it as a direct threat to democracy.
And again, I want to make sure you just answer this in the affirmative, that the Republicans certainly would get rid of it if it benefited
The
them.
Republicans, Brian, yeah, I mean, I know, and I understand I pin you, you pin me. And that's the way it should be on this show. I will say this. When Donald Trump said, I could kill someone, in the middle of New York City,
right,
and get away with it.
Fifth Avenue.
Yes, Fifth Avenue, right? Which kind of is the middle. Manhattan is
right,
New York
really
City,
is.
in a way, and Fifth Avenue is it, right? Well, I thought, yeah, right, okay. I'm not so sure now that's not true, okay, in the Republican Party. So if you're going to back Donald Trump and all he did and didn't do as president, and not just back him, continue to back him, even when he was, and I still think he'll get legal repercussions from it, when he actually was one of, if not the main catalyst in driving people on January 6th to take over the Capitol.
Absolutely.
There's nothing you won't do. Tell me what you want. I mean, I'm not turning around to you. I'm just saying, somebody who's out there, tell me something the Republicans won't do to keep their power. They are terrified. They're afraid of America. They're afraid of the vote because they know all they have is allegiance to the rich, quasi Nazi fascism, and a desire to go back to somewhere between probably prior to, so say, they'd like 1860, but maybe they'd settle for 19.
Well, they have a nostalgic view of the past, which most people.
Well, they have a white person's view of the past. Right. It's a white person's view of the past, and I find that fascinating to me. If you are a gay American, how you support the Republicans, because you're not included in that white view of the past. If you are a woman, how do you support Republicans? You're not included in that view of the past, right? And these are white people who aren't included in that view of the past. You could certainly make a strong argument that if you're a poor white person, you're not included in that view.
Right. I mean, I don't mind the nostalgic view of watching a Chaplin film, but when you're talking about something that involves bigotry,
I agree. But the other thing is, I mean, yeah, well, that's a good thing to talk about just briefly. Chaplin films are great. They were set in a certain period of time. They used the best technology available
at the time, right?
And everything on TV blows everything Chaplin ever did away in terms of technology. Not blowing Chaplin away because Chaplin was a true genius of his time. So you just can't go back. I mean, you can't. It changed. You can't go back to yesterday, let alone the 1950s, let alone a 1950s that has a view that the only thing that you might say was better in the 1950s, might say, okay, was maybe it appeared crime as we report it was down, but certainly the crime of keeping women down, the crime of making them second class citizens,
Right.
of not having, of gay men and women being reduced to non entities. It wasn't.
And people
And
were
the other,
back to work
yeah,
in the 1950s.
I'm sorry.
Well, people were back to work in the 1950s
Well,
too, which
yeah, Brian,
kept
that's
people off the streets.
well,
Right.
that's true. And the reason they were back to work, and
We're
again,
building the
I'm
rebuilding Europe. I mean, that's
well, wait, look, I mean,
money
it
in the
was great.
pocket.
We were the only thing standing.
Right.
Russia and communism and they weren't the threat at that point that we thought they were. I mean, they were opposed to us. Nothing worked. We still don't know how many Russians went up in spaceships. They never told us about. I mean, we were more open, not that open, but more open than they were. So, it was great. I mean, I'm not saying good things didn't get done. The interstates got built, but guess what? They're falling apart now, and
Right.
the Republicans don't want to do anything about. I mean, what do I was asked? Well, I asked Republicans that I know two things.
They'll put the
What,
roads in at the state level, so their state's fine.
well,
Right.
but that they're pretty hard to do too now because the interstates can't be funded. Or
Right.
really, you can't do certain things. So I always ask Republicans that I meet two things. I said, number one, what is it that you're for? I mean, tell me something that you want to spend money for. Just tell me that or something. And the other thing I says, how does it feel to be a Nazi? And usually
Right.
by that point, they're usually not talking to me
Right.
anymore, which is fine. But I mean,
Because that's
really,
even better than their bullshit. You're a socialist or a communist. Just call them a Nazi. That's what I do to my cousin.
well, no, I mean, I mean, really,
Says I don't
um,
appreciate you calling me that. Well, you've been calling me a communist all your life, so I call you a
well,
Nazi.
I mean, the other thing is that the Republican Party has also not they've adopted and sort of led the way at the same time. It's sort of like, I guess the example I use a lot is, how much did the Beatles lead and how much did they follow what was going on, right? A little bit of both. And I think with a thing that is a huge problem right now, white victimization doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Okay. Yet they have every war on Christmas. Doesn't exist. Right. Uh,
Cancel culture doesn't exist.
no. Uh, but again, it's that you canceled my culture. Whoa, 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 slow down. Your culture is white culture.
Right.
America's not white. It's a whole mix of interesting and fascinating ethnic groups. So yeah, and I would love to know. I would love to know this. 6 books of Dr. Seuss were canceled. Um, I made it a point to go back and look at all of them, only because actually only two of them I was familiar with. And yeah, they were of their time
Mm-hmm.
and they need to go. Now, it would be another thing if you canceled all Dr. Seuss. That's something else. That's censorship. The other thing is, was there, maybe I missed it, was there a national order to do this? I don't think so. It was the Seuss Foundation itself
Well, they're
that
not worried about
decided.
facts. You see what I'm
Well,
saying?
I know that, but I am, okay? And that's my point. It's one thing if Joe Biden said, okay, these 6 books, he didn't say jack shit. He stayed out. I mean, and they decided to do that. Now, with Mr. Potato Head, now I have a close affinity for Mr. Potato Head for a couple of reasons. One is we were both born the same year. Did you know that, Brian? Mr.
No, but
Potato
it
Head was
sounds
born.
logical. I can imagine
Mr.
it.
Mr. Potato Head was born in 1952, and Dave Price was born in 1952. So that was the biggest toy that was born at the same time I was. The other thing that I have a great affinity for Mr. Potato Head for was my uncle ran a huge, and my grandfather helped him out with it too, although his was small, potato farm. That's how the Ivanses made their money. So I had unlimited potatoes to stick Mr. Potato Head in. So I could have a whole potato head army for nothing if I wanted to. And people forget, originally it was just, you just got in the package, the eyebrows, the eyes, the nose, and a hat, stuck them in with pins, and they went in a real potato. And you run around and have a potato talk. And, eventually plastic comes in. But here's the thing, Brian. They never changed the gender of Mr. Potato Head. Never. Do you realize that?
Never.
Here's what they did. They took the name Mr. Potato Head off the box. That's all they did. That's all the facts did. And because these assholes won't read, won't understand, jump on it. Uh, so you've got two non-playing. They just don't even hold water. That they're not only aren't they canceled, they weren't. One was canceled by the organization that puts them out. Right? They're allowed to do that, and the other was just a change of a box, and yet we have a whole party called the Republican Party that seems to be more upset with that than they did with the pandemic, than they do with the fact that their own people took over the Capitol and are now no longer is, at least in my view, and I think in the FBI's view too, international terrorism has taken a distant second place to domestic terrorism. Um, and I think the interesting thing is, and then I'll get off this kick because I'm just not a fan of Republicans, but somebody, I always say somebody smarter than me, and that's not that hard. That's 99% of the known world. But, Christians will say, WWJD, what would Jesus do? And somebody kind of took off on this, says, if you find yourself on the sides with any Nazis or Nazi sympathizers, you're on the wrong side. That just makes sense, right? That just makes sense. And so you might not be a Nazi, but if you're calling yourself a Republican, that's the party that accepts, tolerates, condones, and empowers Nazis. So, if Captain America were around, he would be kicking your butt. Right.
Right.
And I, again, the question on the floor is not, is it a repeat of Nazi Germany? That won't happen, because that was happened in a period of time. But the fact is that it's at one point, what was it? National Socialist Party, I think, started out with 4% of the people in Germany.
It was very, very small in the beginning.
4 or 5.
They were arrested and all this kind of stuff.
And they got, and again, give the devil his due, as cliched as that is. Adolf Hitler was able to rally a people in terms of, and some of it was uplifting, unfortunately, just uplifting to the German people, but and some of it was based on the Treaty of Versailles, because the Allies, who weren't called Allies then, that was Second World War, but the powers that won just devastated Germany. He was a powerful communicator. In fact, very much Trumpian. But here's the difference, Brian. That's why people fear Hitler because he did this or that. No, Hitler actually wrote Mein Kampf. He did. I mean, he wrote that. That is his book. Okay. Donald Trump hasn't written anything, maybe ever in his life, because I'm sure he got others to produce any term papers he had.
No, I get that. But I think
so. I'm more. What? Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, I still think that. I mean, we can go in forever with Nazi Germany and what had happened, but I still think there's this link of the propaganda from Goebbels that was
absolutely, Brian,
and that does
absolutely.
I mean, Trump had his man, and he had his Fox, and he had his Stephen Miller, and I think that was enough. And that's again why I keep putting propaganda right at the top of the list as far as the things.
No argument.
Because people, like I say, even my one of my cousins today, I was having a discussion. She, again, it was a political discussion, and. I said to her, I said, look, your mother was a sister of my father, and they were all Democrats. They were all Democrats in the 1920s, 30s, 40s until my father's death. And my aunt is just barely still alive. She's still alive, and she has switched, and because of her marriage, and then her sons were three of her sons were conservative, and then she was watching Fox. And I say, well, how does a person? It's very hard to change the circuitry in the brain to make it jump to the other side. But if it's long enough and it's powerful enough, or you feel unsure of if your circuitry is not strong circuitry, I think that it can make the jump and say, okay, now I'm on this side. So no, as you know, and anybody who's watching now, if Dave or I watch Fox, there's nothing that they're going to say that's going to change us. And not because we're ignorant, just because we're intelligent enough to know the difference between propaganda and facts.
Well, and I think that when all this dust that's still circulating when we can ever see through it. Probably the biggest damage, you know, will be the idea, which has been building for a while, the idea that there is, you know, there are no such things as facts. There is no such thing as truth. It's,
Well,
you know,
is there such a thing, Dave, as a flow with just people kind of like the sound, and I kind of alluded to this earlier in the show. Is
right.
there something to that where, there's a certain way that Janine Pirro speaks that somehow
Well,
that up and downness to it really does affect that type of mind?
well, you could be right. I mean, I can't
Billy
disprove that.
Graham had that kind of thing. You think, who
Well,
the hell
but
would
the
be able to
thing,
believe
but the
him?
thing was, Billy Graham had a pretty good guy in his corner, right?
By the way, we just
He,
got a notice. We just got a notice from Ecamm. There's now a potential defect from live streaming on YouTube, and there's an update for. I'm not going to update it now, but just so you know,
no, yes. Well, I said,
yeah,
you know, it wasn't, you know, it's and for well, you know, we don't. I don't. I sometimes I think, and again, it's just difference. We talk sometimes we talk a little bit too much technology on this show, but I think you know, people. It's just good to know. Sometimes the problems are Brian. Sometimes the problems are me. Sometimes the problems are computers, and sometimes it's national and international.
right.
Right? And you know, and this was one of those times when everybody who was live streaming in America using Ecamm on YouTube was experiencing a problem, and that's part of technology. Someday, Brian, you know, you and I won't be alive to see it. This will be as seamless as
Right.
watching NBC. But right now, the
Right now, we're not
technology
there.
is good, and we're not there. But back to, you know, back to your idea.
Of propaganda.
I, yeah, well, I think, you know, I think that's true. Some, you know, they're good speakers, but I think what's even more is people like to be right. I mean, I think that's
Well,
kind
you're
of a
talking
human condition.
confirmation bias now, so then, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's a big term, so I just leave it at
So maybe it's
yes.
it's working its way to get. I mean, you have
Well,
these
what it
these.
is if you don't like black people, okay, and somebody comes along on Fox News and indicates that there's something wrong with black people, that becomes your boy or that becomes your girl. They're speaking your truth. And that's the problem. And, you know, as I said, I never changed it. I don't think MSNBC should be called news. I don't think Fox should be called news. I think that CNN deserves the right, mostly, to be called news. I think the best news stations in America are NPR.
Well,
Uh,
I would also let's just mention this because we have this whole thing about
right.
Cuomo. Chris Cuomo is on CNN, but they were attacking uh, Andrew Cuomo today,
No,
so
no,
it's
no.
not like they're like
I
going to
got
do anybody any
well,
favors.
but I'm going to take it further back. There is no way that Chris Cuomo should ever have interviewed his brother. He should have taken. I mean, yes, I understand. You know, it was a direct conflict, though.
Oh, I
So
agree with you. You're
I'm
right.
not. You know, I'm not going
Looking
to give
back,
them a
you're right.
full. And here's the other thing: all news organizations have to make money to survive. Okay. The only one that wouldn't have to, if and he won't, if
TASS
if
in Russia.
well, yeah, that's I'm talking about American news organization. If Jeff Bezos says, I don't care how much money we lose, you know, we're going to keep the Washington Post alive. But you know, there are very few people that can
How did
do
the
that.
Bridgeton News do, Dave? They held out
Well,
for a long time, though. I guess.
that's very interesting. You know, it's kind of an aside, but I think it does speak to America. And something I'm campaigning for is figuring out a way to return local news. The evening news was, in its time, started and then was purchased by a family called Schofield, and it was a family newspaper. And John Turner Schofield, I believe it was the third. I know he's the second, maybe even the third, and that was my boss. And he was a character, and he was a Republican, but he kept his nose out of it. You know, I mean, he didn't really say much. I mean, in terms of that, you know, he's Republican, and he wasn't very fond. And he might walk by sometime and say, little easy on that Democrat, weren't you, Dave? And I say, well, yeah, I'm easy on Republicans too, or whatever. But the idea of it was, unfortunately, they were predicated on local ads. That's what all local newspapers did. They were also predicated on homogeneous communities. Now, let's take Bridgeton's example. What language would you print a newspaper in to reach the most people today in Bridgeton, New
Oh,
Jersey? Would
that's.
it be English?
I would say you go Spanish.
And there you are, right? So, in other words, you know, there's a lot of that. You know, a lot was they were caught up. Newspapers were caught up in bigger is better, and the problem is that a newspaper, it's very hard. You can open a small bookstore, right? And you can run it, and that's kind of where we're going to see. I mean, that's my prediction after the pandemic. You know, you can't compete with Amazon, you can't compete with Barnes and Noble, you can't compete with Books a Million. They have those three niches closed. Say, open a little bookstore, you can't run a small newspaper. The other thing is the advent of in order radio lessened newspapers' influence, TV lessened newspapers' influence, and finally, the killer really was the internet. And so, yeah.
Right, and that was
So,
fairly quick. Also, I mean, aside from the New York
well,
Times, the Washington Post, I mean, it's
well, and
destroyed them
that's
and so quickly.
that's what's really scary, Brian. It's not just the small papers; they're the only two papers positioned to survive
Right.
right now that I would bet on. They're the only two expanding. They're only two with circulation increases. And what do they have? The New York Times, you know, the most respected newspaper in the world, and the Washington Post in the nation's capital, with America's number one or number two, depending on whether it's Elon or Jeff, given the day, person having this. Um, HLS is quite right. I've seen a number of comments tonight. And the problem becomes what America has to decide. And this sounds kind of, I don't know, but it's true. Is America, Brian, this is the question I have for America tonight. Is America a country only for white people? Or is it a country for only those born in America? Or is it a country for every person of every color, of every religion, of every gender, of every sexual orientation, who was either born an American citizen or became one? And that's the question facing it right now. The Republican Party says, no, you're not. This is who you are. We're the Republicans of the white. Again, certainly, Mandy. You know, the idea of it is, you know, maybe, you know, I've got my ideas. If you are an American citizen, you are an American, right? Now, there is a point where you're in between. You know, we've got the dreamers, we've got people who come into the country illegally. But, you know, I would take Brian tonight, honestly, seriously. I would take just about any immigrant from anywhere before I would share my apartment with a Republican.
Yes.
I just would. And I'm not saying just to be a good guy or anything. I'm just saying, look, you know,
They're not good
still,
people. I mean, really,
that's exactly what I'm saying. And so now, does that mean, look, gangs are nothing new? You know, oh, the Mexican gangs, Irish gangs, German gangs, Italian gangs. Anybody remember
Russian
the mafia?
mob in New York, you know.
Well, but the difference is even there. It's interesting. You did, Mandy. Well, how come I don't know you? I worked at the British Evening News for a decade. No, not a decade. I worked there in the press and the Inquirer. But, you know, I mean, it was interesting. If you think of the German mobs first, the Irish mobs, Germans were the shortest because they got accepted pretty quickly. Irish mobs, Italian mobs, they were really, you know, kind of defensive organizations and then became more or less criminal. But the new mob, like the Russian mob, they're not defending the Russian people. They're defending themselves. They're a capitalistic robber mob, like the Republican Party. They probably look at what the Republican Party does and does that. And that's America, kids. Money, you know, money not only walks, it talks, it runs, it does all that kind of stuff. So, you know, how do you, you know, how do you become a nation that represents everyone? You get as close as you can to one person, one vote, everybody being equal. Notice I said as close as you can. You'll never have equity as long as you have a capitalistic system. I don't think you'll have equity under a communist system or social. You'll never have equity as long as human beings are in charge.
Do you think, I'm just thinking about USA Today, because remember when that came out in the 80s,
right,
or whenever that was, you know, people were saying, well, this is kind of weird looking, it's in color and it's got short articles. Do you think that they kind of felt that it was going to go a certain way, or was that just trying to find a niche?
No. Interesting, because Gannett, who created that,
is that the same Gannett with the Courier Post in New Jersey?
Yeah. And what happened was there were a few families, and they came up with that idea. And of course, the museum where I worked for what 3 years until it closed in 2019 was basically the same family that put USA together, and they were laughed out of town when they had it. They said, "Oh my God!" In fact, people forget this. They, it's newspapers are something I know. I don't expect everyone to know. But when the USA first came out, USA Today, they called it the Mac paper, like light, right? Now, when I used to do the guided tours at the museum, I don't know how many of you have been there, but one of the greatest things we had over what, I'm trying to think of the actual number. I think it was over 800 worldwide papers. We got the front page every day, and we put up some. We talk about, and then some that were every day, like New York Times was up every day, Washington Post was up every day, USA Today was up every day. And I would say, this was laughed at, wouldn't look. And I said, so just walk down here and see who won. And the New York Times just happened to be located every day next to it. New York Times, they talk about the gray lady. I mean, they never had pictures. They still have the fewest color inside, but their front page is still vertical. People read horizontally. USA Today was the first to really get scientists in to learn how people read. And did you know this? Let me see if I can do this. No, the other way. They read in that kind of a curve where you start in the left top and end in the right bottom. And so you put anchors there, very much in development. And they realized that American attention span was going down on average. So one of the interesting things, and thank you for reminding me, Brian, I never did ask this question for 3 years, and I've got to do it. So I just made a note of it here. When USA started, it's very interesting. They could only have, do you know what a jump story is, Brian? Do you know what that is?
Not at all.
Okay, good. I mean, I would. Most people would. A jump story starts on one page and continues on another, right? That you jump.
I would understand.
Well, it makes sense, but I'm just saying. And USA Today had a rule that only one story on each sectional page, meaning one in the front page, the news section, one in the money page, one in the style page, and one in the sports page could jump, because they found out that readership declined, right, taking to the jump. So if you had, I'm making this up, if you had 100,000 readers reading the headline, then you might have 87,000 reading the front, and then you might have half of those jump to the jump page. Now, interesting enough, at some point that changed, because by the time they left, almost all their stories on all four of the front pages jumped. Right? I was always going to ask why that changed, but if you look at it, certainly go back, and look at any old paper. They were all modeled after the New York Times, and so the USA was very successful, continues to be successful. People don't realize this. They do have regional editions, not so many, but almost all the big papers have regional editions. For example, some of them are by time. I don't know. Did you ever, Brian? You can pick up your Philadelphia Inquirer, on Saturday night. You knew that, right?
Yes, I did know that.
Well, guess what? That had to be printed Saturday afternoon?
Probably, yes.
It's a Sunday morning paper. They give up 12 to 14 hours of news to get it out, because some people want the comics, all that stuff that's prepared early. And that's another thing Mandy was putting up.
They have another version, though, that you could pick up.
That's what I'm saying. It keeps coming. Right. They used to run, that's one of the fascinating things studying newspaper history. Is really the history of economics and the history of development in America. I remember the newsboys out there, the musical Newsies. I mean, that was all based on some truth.
I used to be a paper carrier, and I hated that job, because we were doing a lot of work for the newspapers, and they were really dependent on us to keep that going.
Well, and back early, even before you and I were on the planet, they used immigrants, in New York to peddle the papers. And, some of them couldn't even speak English, because they actor, read all about it, and they were actually printing, but small editions. I mean, the other thing is it's cost prohibitive almost to run a press. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, they're beyond expensive, and they sit idle so much. So a number of papers like the Vineland Times Journal that Mandy mentioned earlier, or the British Evening News, where they would take contract jobs. Right. That's another way they stayed in business for a while. And then eventually they got underbid by bigger papers who were doing it. And it makes sense. You want your presses to run 24 hours a day, when they sit idle. Evil Yoda, that's an interesting thing. That's also somewhat bullied in or I shouldn't say bullied in, also somewhat racial. Um, if you go back and study the conception of farming, if you consider farming cotton, do you realize there's more black farmers than there's ever been? They were called slaves. I mean, think about it.
Right.
They knew as much about growing. They knew, picking cotton, potatoes, and of course, it became a landowning thing. And again, that shift there are right. Farmers are renting. All that is true. I Brian, you're from Cherry Hill, so you're an urban boy, although you live in Cumberland County now. I was a Cumberland County boy, so I'm a farm boy who was misplaced. I should have always been an urban boy. But, you could really see it there. And what would happen in my own family, the Ivans, that's my mother's side of the family, they made far more money selling their land than they did farming. The land was more valuable. And I never understood this, and maybe that's, my son still says I don't understand economics, but it just amazed me growing up in the garden part of the Garden State, not the other part, that by 1970s, it was cheaper to import produce from California and the South than it was to grow it there because New Jersey taxes, because of different labor laws and things. So, and there you are. Okay, this is not off topic, Brian. If you think about it, the farms, okay. What do the conservatives want to do? They want to go back to those times. How are you going to go back to them? How are you going to go back to them? What? Amazon is suddenly going to say, "Oh, we were wrong, and we're going to give up this business, and we're just going to go over there." The corporations that own all this farmland, they're just going to give up and say, nah, you know what? Let's return it to the farmers, right? And again, I don't know how many people who listen to us grew up in a farm family, and I didn't grow up in one, but I mean, my mother's side were farmers, and that was a tough damn life. There's absolutely no way I would do it. The two worst jobs I ever had was as a kid, and I said, I'll leave the family if I have to do them. One was cut asparagus. God bless anyone who does that.
What was the problem with that? I just had some tonight. But what?
Well, I know. Well, there was two. One I'm serious about. The other I'm semi-joking about. The one that I'm serious about, you have to bend over and cut it. You're down in the dirt. It is dirty. It's dusty. It's hot. It's just, I mean, I know this might come as a surprise, Brian, to a city boy like you, but they really don't air condition asparagus fields. And asparagus grows in the summer. And this might be a shock to you. It might be a shock to you too. It is warmer in the summer than it is in the winter. My other job, which was terrifying.
Not unless you live in Australia.
Well, that could be. Well, it's still the reverse, right? Still summer, but their summer is the opposite. My other job as a very young kid was to get the eggs from the chickens. Now, have you ever done that? Gone into the chicken coop?
Well, no, but we received some recently from our mutual friend,
right? Because you're a 21st century guy. Okay, right. This was back and so here I am, a little kid, and you know what was funny? Those chickens didn't want to give up those eggs, and they would squawk. And have you ever been in a chicken coop with hundreds of chickens?
No.
It doesn't smell good, and those chickens are and they're trying to peck me, I think, and they're squawking, and it stinks. And so what I would do after I finally did that, I would run into it could be summer again. I'd run into the outhouse. My grandfather had an outhouse. It smelled better in the outhouse than it did in that damn chicken.
Really?
So the idea of it is, we're not going to go back to that. Okay. We're not. We have machines.
Everything that goes back, Dave, just seems to me to be, I don't have that nostalgic or romantic view of the past. I mean, there are some things I'd like to just temporarily come back to see if it were possible, but like ice and things like that.
Well,
or
Brian,
a good snowstorm,
Well,
but in general, no, I don't have anything.
Well, I mean, let's say that somebody said someday I want to go back because climate change is going to kill us, right? Well, you could go back to that, but what does that mean? That means if a pandemic hits, we don't, I mean, the best, I think the healthiest thing for people is to look at today and say, overall, as far as conditions of living, this is the best time to live. I also think they need to look at today and say, but given how far we are out from, whether we slunk from the sea, or emerged from the trees into the caves and came out, or wherever we came from. We didn't come. I know this comes as a shock for many people. We did not come from Adam's rib. I mean, I'm sorry. I like ribs, but
No,
that
so it
no.
means we come from the stork then.
Could be, right? Could be that, but it's not. It's not. So the idea of it is, all of that stuff. Again, we could look at it and say that was a long. We should be better than we are. So I think it's a balancing act of saying, yes, this is good, right? There are things today that are better than ever. Steve Pinker, who's very bright, has pretty much documented that if you look at the whole world picture, there's less violence today worldwide than there's ever been in
Right.
history.
And again, but we've discussed this that that's true. However, all we do is make one mistake with a nuclear war, and then that
Well,
changes.
there you are. It's the
Right.
same thing, and I'm keeping an eye on the time. Around
Because we
nine
do
thirty,
want
we'll
to we
switch.
want to speak a different topic
I
too.
want to
Right.
speak to, yeah, but I'll
Okay.
take, for now. But I think it kind of leads into that, right? Um, Look, there was a time when America could sort of be nationalistic, right? It might even been to our advantage not to get involved in European wars. But even there, we didn't. Do you realize that America was torn? Right after it was, we had people siding with the French and people siding with the British. And that's where political parties actually came from. The Jeffersonian Democrats were Francophiles. And your buddy, who was just living so a musical could be written about him, Alexander Hamilton, was incredibly enamored, was an Anglophobe with the British. And basically, as we settle today, Jefferson would have been a Democrat, Hamilton would have been a Republican. And so, what was a great fight over who should we be with? And so, because we couldn't agree, we didn't really get involved. And what do we have? Two enemies, Canada. They're the nicest people I've ever met. Canadians
Right.
are, yeah, I mean, they really are. I don't know if it's the weather or there's so few. I don't know. And then Mexico. Remember the Alamo? Well, you should. We took the damn land illegally from them and fought. Davy Crockett was nothing but a pirate, And Travis, the guy, the guy who allegedly put that line in the sand with his sword, and Jim Bowie with his Bowie knife and all that. That was Mexico's land. We Texans just wanted it. How do we get it? We'll go and take it. So, going back, not politically, going back, not health wise, going back, not economics. Now, if you study the Great Depression, that is not necessarily a myth. People did take better care of people than we do today. It was not quite. That's another more modern indication of individualism. Like I can take care of me, you take care of you. And basically, that's the Republican philosophy, right?
Right.
It's either I've got mine, you get it the way I did, okay, or I've got mine, I can't worry about you, or I've got mine, you're not getting yours. And Brian, you're good. You're a banker for the school, and you know economics a lot. Is there really such a thing as a limited pool of money? I don't see it. I mean, money is. I mean, money is can always be made more or less or whatever. I mean, there's a limited pool. If gold were the standard, there's only so much gold in the world, right? But money. So what does it mean? If everybody gets more money, does that really mean you get less? No, not
Well, it all comes
necessarily.
down. It really comes down to it's scarcity as far as products and who has
Right.
those products. I mean, that's the
Right.
bottom line. I mean, it's that's why even like this thing with people bringing up the fact that they're putting in a lot of digits there for the stimulus. But I personally don't have a problem. I mean, I don't want this to go into to a long discussion, but World War II, the interest rates were just so low that it was the proper time to buy weaponry and a lot of it. And this
Mm-hmm.
Biden's right. This is the proper time, and not only is it the proper time, it's the right group of people that are receiving it. And the Republicans wouldn't think anything of it to say, "Oh, well, we didn't do that." We give tax break. Well, the tax breaks have the same effect. They just
Look,
put more money in the different people's
this is
pockets.
not original with me, but it is true. The only thing that trickles down is if a wealthy person is peeing out his window and it hits the poorer person on the street. It doesn't now. Yes, indeed. Do you know who the number one job creator was in the pandemic?
Well, I would have to say Amazon.
You are absolutely correct. Now, so
Because that's
they
where the
hide
demand,
behind.
and that's because not because of Amazon, that's because of demand itself that creates
Well,
that,
I
right?
understand that, but
Mm-hmm.
that you're right. But again, they don't look at it and they say, well, that yeah, okay. So if that's true, then why do we know these two facts? That's a good thing. Okay, creating jobs is a good thing. Why, in the middle of the pandemic, did Amazon, who had purchased Whole Foods, why did they cut the hours of Whole Food workers so they were all part timers and couldn't get health benefits? Not a good thing, right? Why are they fighting unionization in Alabama? Why were they cited time and time again in their warehouses for being non COVID compliant? So just the fact that they created jobs, and again,
And again, we have
I'm
the again, and I, look, I know what they say create that, and that almost is a Republican philosophy that the
right.
company create. They don't create. I mean, the
No,
reality is demand creates jobs.
that is
That
correct.
comes first, and
Right.
then whatever. You don't have any. That's why you don't need to have a guy who makes $100 million a year. You can find somebody coming out of a college who's really smart that could probably run it for a much lower salary, but you still have to have the demand. People have to want to buy them. The recovery, and this is why I like what happened with Biden. He's putting money in the pockets of the people who are going to spend it. Okay,
Correct. Correct.
instead of giving it what happened there with that tax cut for the rich and giving money to all the corporations. That was a travesty. That was a travesty. And these people who are making less than you and I have made, Dave, they're actually
Mhm.
saying, I like the smell of that shit. That shit smells good. And
Well,
and they don't realize it.
that's what amazes me. But I think somebody tonight, I don't remember whom, put up something I think is true. Part of the reason that poor white people support Republicans is because the Republicans have painted a picture of all non-whites that is completely untrue. Uh, they've taken your jobs, they've done this, they've done that, they've done this other thing to where it's believable. I mean, I know people who honestly say, not that they were patriots taking over at the Capitol, right? I mean, I've got those crazies doing that, but people say, well, you see, there wasn't really, it just wasn't like a black riot. What do you mean? Or you've got, my favorite senator now says, I wasn't scared. Now, if it had been Black Lives Matter or Antifa, that might have. What do you mean?
Right.
When's the last time you saw Black Lives Matter take an American flag and try to stab a cop with them? So the point is, we'll just leave it at this. Republicans have to go. Now, do they
Oh,
have to go by any means necessary? No, and I'll tell you why. You have to be careful, as I've said before. Yeah, but Trev, I don't disagree with you. But that was the other thing I forgot to say. The other reason I don't like asparagus, true story, Brian. Asparagus makes your pee stink. We know that. Now that's not the worst thing. All right,
And I think
but
Benjamin Franklin wrote an article about that too,
yeah,
believe it or not.
and but anyway, living. I mean, I didn't live on the farm, but surrounded the farm. And one day, my grandfather and grandmother lived in a 2-story farmhouse, and I was upstairs peeing. And so somebody started screaming, your uncle's house is on fire. And I just eaten asparagus and I turned and I peed all over myself. So I think it's psychological, but I still go with the cutting of the asparagus. It's the only vegetable I don't eat, interestingly enough.
Well, I've learned to like it. I never liked many
Well,
vegetables at all, but
it's
I've learned
pretty
to like
hard.
them
It's pretty hard.
if
It's
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 cooked
very healthy for you.
correctly.
It's very healthy for you. It can be very good for you. And of course, you're in New Jersey and you don't like asparagus. I said, well, yeah, you know. I also don't like Taylor pork roll, but a lot of people in New Jersey do. So let's segue a little bit, if you don't
Right.
mind.
We must seg into our next.
Now, what's concerning me this week, probably more than anything else, and again, it may be to my raising and what I know, is the gentleman Robert Aaron Long, 21, who decides to do a few things. One is purchase a gun, and I believe 500 rounds of ammunition. And you know what's interesting, Brian? Now, I mean, I know about guns, but I've always wondered. I mean, there's no limit on what you can get, right? It's not like you can only get X number of rounds. Did you ever notice? And if not, start paying attention. How many times when these shooters are found, they have 500 rounds? I don't know. It's like that's the magic shooter number. I'm not going to kill more than 500 people. Or I don't know. I mean, how many times? It's just a number you see. So anyway, Robert goes in and buys a gun on the spot. Right, comes out and decides to visit a spa. Where he proceeds to, what was it, 332, right? Kills 3 people, okay, maybe 4. Anyway, kills some people, then drives to another couple spots and kills some people, and then heads out, right? Okay. Now, he is arrested. And once again, here's another white man. The joke is, I knew it was right when he said the cops arrested him without incident. What is it about that? I mean, think about that. When is the last time you've heard of a white person being shot in a confrontation with police? I mean, it's happened, right? I mean, obviously it's happened, but I don't remember it. What does that mean? It means one of two things. Blacks are inherently crazy and take on people with guns. I don't think that's true. Blacks, are braver and fight back. I don't think that's true. Or there's a hell of a lot of racist police officials.
Well, you heard
out
with
there.
that chief of
I
police.
I got that. I rarely write things down. So anyway, we arrest Mr. Long without incident. And the gentleman's name, for anybody who's interested, is Jay Baker. Now, Jay Baker has a couple interesting titles. First of all, he's a captain. Now, it's not always true, but captain, it means he didn't start yesterday, correct? It means that he did a good enough job under somebody's eyes to be promoted, or was somebody's cousin or whatever, but had some power. And his second job, which, if it weren't so sad and tragic, it would be funny. He was a communications officer for the, let me get this right, Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. So this wasn't some new cop on the street trying to get fame. He's supposed to be the person that deals with the press, right? And there were a number of quotes, but this is the one that will go down in infamy. Talking about Mr. Long, a suspect, and why you have to say he's a suspect until he's found guilty. There's no question in my mind, or should be in anybody's mind, that he murdered 8 people. I mean, that's a given. That's a given. Reasons later, and we'll find out. Here's a quote, Brian. He was pretty much fed up, and at the end of his rope. And yesterday was a really bad day for him, and that is what he did.
So he's fed up.
I don't know Mr. Baker at all. I don't.
We got some lag, by the way, Dave. Just so you know.
I know. I saw this back, but that's the problem they're trying to work out beyond us. So we'll do it, and we'll do the best we can. The interesting thing to me is this. Number one, Dave Price's view: if you take certain jobs, more is expected of you than if you take other jobs. All jobs have expectations, and I don't mean one job is better than the other. But if you're a policeman, you're supposed to uphold the law. So anytime a policeman breaks the law, I think that's more hideous than a criminal, a lifelong criminal who is sworn to do it. That's number one. Number two, part of that is you are sworn to serve and protect, not serve and protect the people that you like, or not serve and protect the people that you deem good people. You're, the community where you are. Thirdly, and most damning to me, to Mr. Long, is you are the captain, a captain, which may just be, maybe it's Barney Fife and him and they gave him the captain. I don't know, but he is a captain, which means you have even more responsibility, right? Just like in a school system, I charge the principal higher than I do the department head, higher than I do a teacher, right? And finally, he is the communications officer. So let's suppose for a moment that at one point he indicated that he was not supporting him. Well, let me rephrase that statement for you, how he should have done it if he wasn't supporting Mr. Long. He was pretty much fed up, and at the end of his rope, And yesterday was a really bad day for him. And you know what that stupid motherfucker did? He decided to kill 8 people. You
Right.
can still use the quote, right? But in that context. Now, here's the other thing. Right now, we do not know. There may be multiple motives, right? But there are
But why
two
would the police,
surface.
Dave? I'm sorry to interrupt, but why do they go to the murderer, the assassin, essentially, and let him define why he did it? No, you don't do that.
Well, yeah, you do. If one thing, I'm sorry, Brian, I didn't give you the whole story. Today we all have a social media. What shall we say? I want to say footprint, imprint, maybe, right? And here is Mr. I'm sorry, don't want to. Sheriff's Office Captain Jay Baker was very proud of his t shirt that said COVID-19 imported from China, the way Trump said it. So that would lead me to believe that either he has a really fucked up sense of humor
Right.
or that he may have a problem with Asians. And that gets to my point. Certainly. So, on one hand, there is no question in my mind, and I want to deal with that just for a moment, that Mr. Long, and I will use that and I will take that Mr. out of them as soon as he is convicted. But Robert Aaron, only 21 years old, no question, he had a sex problem. Okay? There's no question. Just about everybody verifies it. So it may be, as I go through it, it may be a
Why is
crime.
he killing? I mean, you would think he would get more sex if that was his problem.
No, okay. But here's the problem. Sometimes you may do something for one motive, and that may be true, but it takes on a bigger motive that may or may not have been your attention. And right now, due very much to the pandemic, and Trev, maybe you're right. You know what, Trev? I live in Virginia. Not quite as easy to buy a gun as anywhere else, and we've got all the signs up. Please do not bring your gun here, but it is an open carry state. I got to check that out. Remind me, Brian. I really do because it just always does seem. And 500 rounds of ammunition. Once a once 100, but 500 rounds of ammunition. Anyway, coming back here to our, and I say that sarcastically, our young friend Robert Aaron Long. The problem becomes that 6 of the women he killed were Asian. And right now, again, somebody checked me on statistics, and again, you have to be careful. But I believe during Trump's 4 years, it was almost a 220% increase over that 4 years of violence against Asian Americans. Now, that's nothing new. Again, oh, Dave, you're going to do some history. Yeah, I am. Okay. Let's just run a quick history of Asians in America. Chinese started arriving first. They were the first Asians in the 1850s. They came for 2 reasons. One, because, well, obviously left their country for opportunity, and China was in bad shape. They came over here, though, really for 2 reasons. They were West Coast, because, of course, you didn't have an intercontinental jet to fly to New York, so you ended up on the West Coast. And they built the railroads, the western to east intercontinental railroads, and they did the mines. And they were accused of taking jobs from good Americans and set upon that way. So finally, it got so bad in 1882, there was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which said we would accept no more citizens from China. Now, have we done that with Germany at any point? I mean, not war years, but I'm saying any other time? England? And okay, so in other words, was it all they were taking the jobs, or we didn't want more of those people there? Now, here's one that I did not know. Those 2 I did know. This one I didn't. There was in the late in 1900, there was a bubonic plague outbreak in San Francisco. Now, it's pretty much been proven that it was brought over on an Australian ship, but the first victim, Brian, quit playing with your cat or whatever you're doing, and listen, child, I'm trying to give you knowledge here. Now, the first victim was Chinese, so they blamed China, and what they did, San Francisco has always had, LA too, has a very large Chinatown. Washington, D.C. is now reduced to 1 block. It's the smallest Chinatown in the world, but we have one. And so what they did, they got enough officers and volunteers to encircle Chinatown and let no one in and no one out. nowhere else, because it was the Chinese bubonic plague. Sounds a little bit like what President Trump said. Of course, 1940s, you can make an argument that no one was mistreated as much for a short period of time as Japanese Americans, that short period of time, going internment camps. Everything we know in Upper Deerfield, we're not going to talk about that tonight, is based on that, getting those. Um, end of the Vietnam War, Vietnamese who were in any way associated with the Americans were going to be killed. They wanted their freedom. They come down and they settled down, big congregations in Louisiana. They were fishermen in Vietnam. They decided to be fishermen here. The shrimp votes. Do you remember, Forrest Gump, and Bubba Shrimp and all that? That was true, kind of a certain extent. And who organized the patrols to make sure that they obeyed the laws in the 1980s, Brian? Would you like to know?
Sure.
The Ku Klux Klan. They authorized their own Navy to make sure that the Vietnamese were doing that. And then as we move into the 21st century, Koreans began taking the stores, the joke, the joke that people make that isn't really funny. Koreans have all the delis, and Indians, have all the gas stations, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, there were quite a bit of now this was interesting. This was probably true economic violence, more not whites against Koreans, but blacks against Koreans. And now we move to today. And what President Trump still refers to it as the China virus, the Kung flu, and what's the other thing? He says 3. I can't remember the other one. So once again, our focus comes, Mr. Trump, who I never called President Trump and never will. Mr. Trump, using his pulpit for bad things, it was the only thing he used it for, took feelings that have been as American as apple pie and revved it up. So here we are. And it's interesting, too. Timing is so much. For probably one of the big topics, and I'd have to go back and look at it, but I'd say one of the big topics since January, a few things, has been the rise in Asian crime, against Asian crime. And here this guy decides, hey, I'm going to go out and kill 8 people, 6 of whom are there. But let's suppose for a minute, just for a minute, that it wasn't a hate crime, that it was really driven by his sex addiction. Okay. Whether people believe it or not, you can become addicted to sex. You can. That is true. I mean, scientists have proven that.
Although some people disagree, but yes.
Well, but well, you know why? Do you know why they disagree?
I don't know, maybe they're sex addicts. Who knows? I mean,
no, it's not that, Brian. It's that they believe it's a sin. Well, yeah, come on, bullshit. Right. It's not a sin. I mean, it's not a good thing.
Well, yeah, it's an addictive behavior. There's no doubt about it. I mean,
the stories are. I mean, mothers who were supposed to pick up their children go pick up something. I mean, it follows it. Addicted behavior is addicted behavior.
You get a high from what you're doing, and you
or sometimes what's even worse is you don't even get the high. You know what I mean? It's like you once got it and you try to recover it or something. But anyway, but let's look at what he did wrong. All right. There's nothing wrong with being religious as long as your religion is not used as a weapon. Well, he came from one of those evangelical fucking churches, right? And they listed everything that he was doing was a sin. And he believed it. He was very active in his youth ministry. He told his friends, basically, I'm a sinner. Okay.
Well, why didn't he kill himself instead of the people?
Well, we're going to get to that in a moment, Brian. So what happens is, as so often is the case, instead of blaming himself,
which was the real thing to do,
or instead of accepting
what he was doing,
or accepting real help, psychological help, which was offered to him and he refused, okay, he decided to pray his addiction away. Now, I'm not going to say that that's never happened, because I know a person that did happen to. He found God. He was my next door neighbor. He was as big a drunk. He predated drug use, but he's as big as drunk as I ever was. And he was able, through his relationship with God and church, to do it. But this guy obviously didn't cut it, right? He didn't make it. And the thing that I think is so bad about what he did, I mean, there's so much, is No matter if he did, he blamed others. So really, even if you have an addiction, okay, and I'll speak of myself, I never blamed my dealers. you know, I never blamed the liquor stores. I never blamed some people that are actually, I don't want to give away secrets, but, there's people that you might even know that, was involved with me with my drug past, right? I made a decision. And then eventually, there's a saying in AA, and which is kind of true. The man. What I'm trying to get this right. First the man. Of course, that was kind of a sexist. So we'll say the person takes the drug, and eventually the drug takes the person, and that's what happens, right? But still, you've got to own up to it. You've got to seek help. You've got to do it. And killing 8 people with and having 500 rounds of ammunition. Now, from what they again, you have to be careful, but indications are that he was leaving the state, headed for Florida, and they haven't yet said whether. They got it. I mean, whether his car was pointed that way or whether he had, we don't know why, but the report is he was headed to Florida, where they assume he was going to do it. Now, apparently, he had visited 2 of those places before that, people that he killed. So that, obviously it wasn't some random necessarily, although the one just might have been random. It was there. So it doesn't really matter whether it was anti-Asian or not in this case, because it was. You know what I mean? I mean, you can paint it that way. And sometimes that's dangerous because certainly, it smells like it was, or by targeting those places, just like we said, almost all the shrimpers now in the Gulf, Louisiana side, are Vietnamese. A lot of massage therapists, and there are places that you don't get the happy ending, and there are places that you do. All right, and but that is a quick way to in a culture where you're learning the language, right, or whatever, and you fall into it, and so we get President Biden and Vice President Harris, who traveled to Atlanta, correct? And basically, Biden says, we're not going to accept this. And he's right. But the Republicans are still worried about Mr. Potato Head's dick or lack of dick. And Dr. Seuss's non-canceled books are now obsessed with the fact that Joe Biden fell on the airplane, Airport One, right? Going up, I'm not airport, Air Force One. No, look at your president, you pieces of shit. Look at the hatred that you have in your heart. Churches, look at God God didn't pray this guy into that situation. He didn't pray him out of it. Science works. God's iffy, right? And so this one incident captures where America is right now. It really does.
Especially the Asians. I mean, it just makes no sense at all. None of it makes sense. I mean, look, I'm not.
Well, no, because Brian, it doesn't have. Are Asians white? No. That's why they have Asian to check off, right? you know, and these people, so many of in America, don't like anyone different than them. They don't like anyone different than them. They
Well,
they have
then
they have
where
two
is
or
this
three
going to
reasons
go,
not to. Are
Dave?
you? Let me ask you this, Brian. Are you part Jewish by ethnicity?
Absolutely. I was raised as a Jew,
Right.
and I still
So that
I consider myself an atheist Jew. That's how.
well, right, which is actually there's probably more atheist Jews than there are
Right.
atheist Christians. But do you consider yourself a liberal?
Yes.
Well, then you got 2 strikes against you. See,
Absolutely. I've got it all
because
kinds
you're
of.
different. You're different twice,
Right.
right? Uh, and here's the crux, kids. I love that. I just love that word. It means nothing, but I love that word crux. I guess because it rhymes with fox. I don't know, but I like crux. Okay. Anyway, here's the crux. If you have a country in which all growing populations are all growing populations are non-white, okay? You better accept the fact that they are Americans too, because they're beginning to outnumber you. Um, and they certainly, not all, but I mean, many immigrants outwork you, right? They take the jobs that no one else will and do them very well. We're talking earlier about farming. Find me. Do you know how do you know how we could have a food crisis tomorrow, Brian?
Yeah, if you lost all of your immigrant workers,
Who's going to go pick?
well, it's not going to be your neighbor with that red hat on. That's for sure.
So, I mean, what's interesting? Um,
You
so,
can't eat your ammunition.
I've often said, and we're so much controlled, Brian, too. What our family believes, our DNA. Yeah, some limits. Basically, I think one of the biggest things is where you grow up. You tend to either agree with where you grow up or rebel.
That's
I rebelled.
determinism. That's determinism right there.
Well, I rebelled. Yeah, I mean, my parents wanted me to rebel, and my son rebelled even more, and I wanted him to rebel even more. The idea, I mean, against what's wrong, but or some go the other way and fall into these patterns, and then are there. But if you're in what I call a white pattern, uh,
You're
forget about
reactionary. I mean,
forget about sin. Forget about anything else.
they have their own mores. I mean, that's basically
Well, and I mean, I've said on this show, and I am a relative moralist. Okay, I don't think there's any such thing as absolute morality. I really don't. But I think there's some things that come very, very close. And one of those is you should do no harm to anyone who isn't directly harming you.
right.
Okay. And, but these haters, they believe that skin color, gender, really, you know, how does an Asian person hurt me? Right? How? I make it half of a joke, and I don't mean to disparage any gay man in America. I don't mean to, but I mean, if you really think about it, I used to present this to anti-gay people. I'd say I want everybody to be gay. Wait a minute. If every man was gay, I could get some of the women that absolutely, Mandy, it is real. I could get some of the women who, for some strange reason, find George Clooney more attractive than me. I don't quite get that. I mean, come on. How does a gay now? You really want to know where that comes in? If you try to closet that, do you really think how many gay Boy Scout leaders do you think there were? A hell of a lot. How many of them were married with kids? A hell of a lot. How many priests were subverting their sexual? I mean, it's like Jesus Christmas. Come on. And there are some things we got over. I think we did somewhat get over our anti-Catholic bias, which was real. We certainly got over our anti-Irish bias, but Catholics, whether you believe it or not, are still Christians, right? So maybe they got a pass. Irish or white, maybe they got a pass. Well, I don't know, man. I mean, what you had a president who okayed this stuff. Last thing I will say about Trump, and this, and I think it applies to both of our things tonight, is it's very important for everybody, I think, to understand that Trump did not cause the problems. They were there before Trump, right? What Trump did
And I think
is
it really got bad
it
after Obama was elected.
well, true, but it was bad. It was bad all of history. Okay, it was a bad all of history, all of American history. But what Trump became was the first president in the modern era, and I say the modern era, World War II till today. So the second half of the 20th century today, who emboldened, reached out to them as brother and sister, and said, what's his quote? Good people on both sides, or they're not bad. Well, yeah,
I'll
they
cover your
are.
legal fees if you beat the shit out of
Yeah,
them.
yeah, right. So I mean, you had a, so I guess the point is, Mr. Trump is no longer president, but those who said, and there were many, said he would be around in some form for a long while. Uh, Now we don't know yet. Back to Mr. Robert Aaron Long, It's still in the infancy. It's investigation. Was he a Trump supporter? I'm pretty sure that Cherokee County Sheriff's Office Captain Jay Baker was. I don't think there's, Jay, if I'm in any way, misrepresenting you, please come on Divided We Stand, and I will listen to what you say. So going back to this, here's what's going to happen. We're going to continue to have these incidents until the Democratic Party is able to come to grips with the fact that such things as unity do not exist for the time. Remember, nothing is ever, is never, permanent. But for right now, there can be no unity, nor should there be. And so, therefore, if you have control, the Republicans already do it. You do whatever you can. And I think without it, the Democrats are going to face some trouble in 2022. I really do. In the fact that they've promised some things, but remember, it's what did you do for me yesterday, right? With the American people.
And the gerrymandering too is going to be a problem.
Well, anything that smacks of now, and I have, we all have our heroes, right? I think you should be very careful about having heroes. I think you have to, I make this distinction. It works for me. I have what I call personal heroes for their personal lives, and I have professional heroes for their professional lives. If you're going to judge Martin Luther King solely on his faithfulness as a husband, he wasn't faithful. He wasn't. Okay. But certainly, if you're going to judge him on his social issues stand, he was the greatest American in my lifetime. But I think a person who falls into that category, and it's very rare to find one who falls in both, is John Lewis for me.
You say Jimmy Carter, but that's.
Well, yeah. Jimmy Carter is another great one. The only thing I will say is Jimmy Carter had some hang-ups, lust in his heart, and he's kind of vindictive. And he actually, the worst thing about his presence, he was a good man, but he brought his insiders in. So he was sort of like, to me, he was sort of not as bad, but Ulysses S. Grant just kind of got over it. And I think Jimmy, kind of brought what they would call it then, the peanut farmer mafia or the Georgia mafia. They weren't a criminal, but not the best government. But right now, so, John Lewis deserves, just for all he did for America, to have the John Lewis Voting Right Acts passed. And the only way I see them being passed is the Democrats just saying, by any means necessary, again, not shooting their Republican colleagues. If that means taking down the filibuster, you take down the filibuster. If there's a way around it, I think right now, to me, if all the 43 states get to enact all of their voting rights restrictions, democracy is done. That's enough for me tonight. But unless you have any questions or anybody wants to ask me, what I did with my $1,400 relief check, or don't ask me who's going to win the NCAAs. I'm a Villanova graduate, and I thought they had a chance until their point guard is done for the season. So those two I can't answer, but anything else I'll try. Now, you look tired, Brian. Are you tired?
Well, yeah. I have a lot of things going on.
I know. So I wasn't.
By the
way, may I mention that, or would you prefer I do?
You want. You can do it.
Okay. For those of you tonight, we're talking earlier about personal heroes, and as much fun as I make of them, and as much as I really truly believe he was not born on this planet, that he is from an outer space. Brian is a spectacular person on a number of levels. And you could never fault Brian for his dedication. Brian got a hold of me this afternoon and said, Dave, we may not be able to do the show. And I said, and he said, basically, his mother, who's been in the nursing home
6.5 years.
So, wow. 6.5 years is the prognosis is she will not make it to see May. That seems to be.
Should be lucky. Anyway, between tonight and
a
month.
Yeah, whatever. And I told Brian, the show doesn't matter. And it doesn't in the relative scheme of that. But before you think Brian is heartless and cruel, you do have a relative that was there
Right.
who is a nurse